Hello, welcome to the question and answer period featuring Dr. Jennifer Copeland, a professor in the Department of Kinesiology, as part of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences Public Professor at Home series. So I'm Michelle Helstein. I'm an Associate Dean in the Faculty of Arts and Science, and I'm also a professor in the Department of Kinesiology, where I've had the great pleasure of working alongside my friend and my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Copeland. Jennifer and I both started our careers at the University of Lethbridge in 2003. Jennifer's an exercise physiologist whose research expertise is in physical activity and aging well. It's a topic that I know from personal experience that she is passionate about, both professionally and personally. And so as her and I have aged together over the last 17 years as colleagues, this conversation has come up often. And she always has a new and interesting research project on the go that helps inform practical, evidence-based advice about the interconnections of sedentary behavior and aging well. So today I'm going to ask Jennifer 5 questions that were submitted by you, the audience, following the relaunch of her Public Professor talk on Facebook Premiere. Okay, here we go. So 5 questions with Dr. Jennifer Copeland. So, as we all know, COVID-19 has dramatically changed our lifestyles. You and I would normally be having this conversation in the hallway, but instead we're both sitting in our respective homes at computers, and I am sitting, and I think you are too. So it's changed our lifestyles, and for most of us, that means that sedentary time has increased significantly. But this question is coming with respect to essential workers and the fact that their days have actually gotten longer. Their level of activity arguably probably has increased. And so this person wonders if there's a danger that their health can suffer from not enough downtime. So what are the health implications for those who do not strike a balance between sedentary and active time?
That's a great question and an interesting one to think about. There's really no question that the balance of our daily movement behaviors is what's important to think about. And in fact, a lot of national guidelines for physical activity in different countries, including soon to be Canada, are moving away from giving physical activity guidelines to giving now 24-hour movement behavior guidelines, where you consider the entire day, because we know it's actually super important how much you sleep, how much light physical activity you get, as well as how much physical activity you get. And also, I don't think anyone, certainly not myself, would ever suggest that there should be no sedentary time in someone's day. That's an outrageous suggestion, and many of the activities that we like to do and need to do involve sitting. So it really is about finding that balance. And so when you consider a scenario where someone is working a lot and getting a lot of occupational physical activity, there's no question that you need to focus on adequate rest and recovery. So recovery and sleep in particular are crucial to health. And so a scenario where you're getting endless amounts of physical activity throughout the day and not enough rest would be bad. So there's no question that you need to think about that. But at the same time, having a certain degree of fitness, and in particular musculoskeletal fitness, enough muscular strength and endurance, is also an important part of being able to successfully navigate a full day of stressful, activity. And the other thing to remember is that sometimes physical activity doesn't have to be strenuous. It can actually be a break. So a nice walk outside on a nice day after a really long shift, while it might seem at first glance like, oh, I can't do any more activity, sometimes it's actually really beneficial to help people unwind. And walking is really good actually for changing up, muscle activation. So if you have a job where you've had a lot of repetitive loading, then some easy walking can actually be really beneficial. So that was a really long, complicated answer to say the balance is 100% part of it, which is why we recommend people think about their day kind of as a whole. But that I think if people can find room for even some low intensity recreational activity, it's going to be beneficial, even if you're having long days at work.
So Jennifer, one of our viewers read the press release about your recent grant from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, or what we call shorthand CIHR. And I just want to break into the question here for a moment to let those of you who don't know about funding agencies in Canada, that CHR is an extremely competitive granting organization. So their support of Dr. Copeland's research speaks to the strength of the project and the significance of the project. So Jennifer, I'm wondering if you can just give us, for those who didn't see the press release, tell us just a little bit about the project.
Thank you. Like most researchers, I'm happy to talk about my newest research project. So thanks for the opportunity. So sedentary behavior and how it affects healthy aging is obviously something I'm very interested in. And we know, and if, you know, for those who watched a replay of my talk there, we know that the health consequences of sedentary time are greatest in people who are the least physically active. So that makes it a particularly important and interesting topic to study in groups of individuals that we know on average are less physically active. And so this is partly why I'm very interested in the effect of sedentary behavior on healthy aging in particular, because older adults on average are less physically active than other age groups. Obviously, I always like to point out there's a real diversity of older adults, so that's certainly not true of everyone, but at a population level, it's true. And so when we look to an assisted living or a supportive living environment, these are wonderful places that allow people to have assistance with, you know, domestic chores and daily activities that most of us have to do, preparing meals, doing dishes, light housekeeping. And while that's really beneficial, much of our preliminary research showed that when we talk to older adults, these are the things that motivate people to get up and keep moving a little bit, is when they have to do these kinds of chores. So it's kind of like a necessity thing. So I was very interested in what this means when you take the need to do these activities away. And so what we've found and others have found is that, in fact, people in a supportive living environment often get more sedentary time and less time simply spent standing and moving around than people who live independently or still live on their own. So this makes it a really good target for some kind of intervention, a sedentary behavior intervention. So along with a grad student, we developed an intervention specifically for assisted living facilities. We worked with some residences here with the Green Acres Foundation. They're wonderful people to work with, and we loved working with the residents. And we developed an intervention that really moves beyond just focusing on individuals and on motivating individuals and on how it's all about individual choice, and looked at ways to embed and incorporate movement within the residents and within the daily activities of the residents. Many of these places have lots of social opportunities and social activities, and so this provides an opportunity to embed some movement within those. So although many of the social activities tend to be sedentary in nature, cards, games, movies, these kinds of things, there's opportunities to sort of shift the habits and change the culture so that people stand up and move around a little bit more. And so we developed what we would call a multi-level intervention that didn't just look at targeting individual education, although that was part of it, but also looked at, you know, some changes to the built environment, some changes to the social environment. So we did a very small pilot of that, and it looked like it was feasible and would work. We interviewed some of the older adults and some of the staff members afterwards, and they felt fairly positive about it. So we applied for some funding to expand this. And so now we're going to test it out on a slightly larger scale in some other provinces. So with some colleagues at the University of Ontario and at the University of New Brunswick, we're going to test our intervention at some residences in different places and get more evidence of how effective it may be.
So thanks, Dr. Copeland. So that question came from someone who had read about your research and was really intrigued by it. And so given that last point that you made about seeing the potential benefits, this person's wondering if, based on the pilot project or the pilot study for that project, you can draw any conclusions about how quickly we might expect to see health benefits from increased activity within that population.
Thanks for that question. That's an interesting question, and unfortunately it is a difficult one to answer. But I will speculate a little bit. Our pilot project was brief, so we only did some measurements before and after a 6-week period. So that's quite short. What's interesting is that we had 2 different groups of older adults participate in the project, and those who had lower physical function scores at the start we were more likely to actually see some measurable improvements in things like balance and gait speed, even after 6 weeks. So I think the message there, which we know from physiology, is that it sort of depends on what your starting point is, how long the stimulus will take to see an improvement. So I think relatively quickly, if you're quite inactive, small changes can make a difference relatively quickly. These aren't going to be dramatic changes. And of course, it also depends on how much, what the dose is what we would say. So how much physical activity or movement is being incorporated into the day. It's also important to remember, in science, we're very interested in measurable changes, clinically meaningful differences. But there can be small changes that perhaps we can't necessarily capture with our tools in, beyond people's physical health and their mental health and their quality of life. But so that's a really long-winded way of saying we're not sure. But I would say that, within a few months of increasing movement and physical activity, most people will start to see noticeable improvements in some important outcomes, particularly functional outcomes.
Well, Dr. Copeland, that's a great lead-in to our next question, actually. But before I get to question number 4, this particular viewer first wanted me to give you a shout out, congratulate you on a great presentation, which they enjoyed very much, to thank you for sharing your research. And so this person's question is about a change in their activity. So up until a few months ago, they worked a fairly active job, but they've recently transitioned to an office type job where they're very desk based. And of course, as we've talked about earlier, COVID is making that the situation for many, many people right now. They're finding the transition not only is affecting their waistline, but their mood, their motivation, their focus. So do you have any tips on how to incorporate better choices into an atmosphere like that?
Okay, I really feel this question because I feel like I'm living this question myself. And Michelle, maybe you agree. I don't know if I ever really noticed how much time I actually used to spend walking around campus in between classes and meetings until it's all gone now. And I can't believe what a difference it actually makes in the course of a day. So this is a hard thing that I think a lot of people are thinking about. And as I said in my introduction to the release of my talk, I do think it provides an opportunity because some of us are now suddenly thinking about this a little more than we used to. So, but it is hard. So I can tell you a little bit about what sort of my strategies have been when I realized how much my total daily activity was declining. So the first is that I try to bookend my days with even a little bit of purposeful activity. So even a short walk around the neighborhood before I sit at my desk for 10 Zoom meetings is a good way to start the day. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the 10th Zoom meeting, a nice walk around the neighborhood can also, so at least you're bookending your day with a little bit of movement. And the change in the weather is going to help with that. I think it's a little easier to convince yourself to get out for a little stroll. Obviously, I recommend incorporating some purposeful physical activity in your day whenever you can. But in terms of the whole sitting at home in front of your computer all day long, I think the only way to avoid that is to be really intentional about it. So I honestly tell people, build it into your calendar, build a 10-minute window into your calendar in the day. And in that window, you're going to stand up. And even if you're just walking around your house, at least you're changing your posture. So that's one strategy. Another strategy I've been using is whenever I have to take a phone call, I make sure I do that away from my desk. Most of us have cell phones now. You don't actually have to sit at your desk to take a phone call anymore. So use all phone calls as an opportunity to stand up and move around. Now, Michelle, as you know, I also have a standing desk, both at home and at my office. But I always want to be clear, standing desks are not a panacea to all this. I'm not a big proponent that standing at your desk is going to replace movement and physical activity. And in fact, really long periods of standing can cause their own problems in terms of, causing people to have sore backs and things like that. But the benefit of them is that they allow you to change your posture throughout the day. So you don't have to always be sitting or always be standing. You can sort of move them up and down and at least change your posture throughout the day, which for me personally helps me not get quite so stiff at the end of the day. So I think to summarize, I think it has to be really intentional, like build a timer in, put it into your calendar as a 10-minute break every hour where you have to just do some stretching and up and down a flight of stairs a couple times. get the blood flowing, because the days, as I think we all know, and Michelle, I'm sure you agree with me, the days just fly by sitting in front of these Zoom meetings and computers, and the next thing you know, it's 6 o'clock and you haven't moved. So I think it actually requires more intent in the current times than it does when at least you're, in a different environment where there's a requirement to move around a little bit.
Given that answer, Jennifer, and I mean, if we were on campus, we might take this last question and do a little bit of a walking meeting. We could do that around our house, but I know that we have a communications person in the background who would be not pleased with the jostling of the camera and the noise that's likely to create. So we'll sit for this final question as well and not change our postures. So our final question comes from a viewer with elderly grandparents. She reports that they've always been quite active, but now, for obvious reasons in the time of COVID-19, they don't leave the house. And so she also reports, and this is her or them, not me, that they're quite stubborn and that they're not really interested in trying new things. So what can those of us who are supporting others in this particular time do to help increase their activity levels without pushing them too far outside their comfort zones?
Michelle, one thing about how much all these questions resonate with me is it tells me that a lot of us are having a lot of similar worries and concerns right now in this time. Because again, this is a question that really hits home for me. As you know, my elderly dad lives alone. And is also quite housebound, and I've been worrying about this exact same thing, and he is most definitely tired of hearing from me, asking him about his daily activity. So it is hard, there's no question. This is a real challenge for older people in this scenario, and in particular stubborn ones, as the question mentioned. So the first thing I'll say is that it depends a bit on where people are at, how I would answer this question without knowing the sort of functional capacity of the people we're talking about, because your answers might change a bit. The one thing I will say though is that if they are able to get outside for a walk, especially now that, as I said, the weather is getting better, we don't have to worry about ice and things like that. It is still safe as long as they're doing it, not exposing themselves to other people, to get outside for a walk. And this is one of my number one things. So the goal, of course, is we really don't want to lose our mobility. And the more time you spend not walking and moving, particularly when you're older, the rate of decline in your own mobility and your capacity for movement can be pretty rapid. So any kind of walking outside, even brief, perhaps brief but frequent bouts throughout the day will be important. If that's not possible, then there are actually home-based exercises that people can do that can help maintain strength. The biggest goal here is to avoid losing muscle mass and losing strength, which, as I said, is happening to all of us right now, but if you're older, it happens a little more quickly. So there are home-based exercises that, a range of intensities, from chair-based exercises. So if people are quite, perhaps deconditioned or their mobility is low, there are chair-based exercises that are good. If they have better capacity, there are lots of sort of body weight type exercises. And so, but I mean, this does require people to move outside their comfort zone a little bit, as the question asked. And that's true. So in terms of motivating people, how to do that, I'm not sure. But one thing is there are some online resources where they're specifically for older adults that demonstrate some of these exercises. And I can provide some links of some ones that I think are good. And so these might be options if people are tech savvy and want to be able to, and are able to watch it on an iPad or a computer and then get some ideas. That's one option to consider. So some simple walking, and perhaps some home-based strength exercises are good options right now for people that are spending more time at home than we would like. It's not a perfect scenario, but at this point we're just trying to motivate people to do whatever little bit they can will help.
Thank you, Dr. Copeland, for working through those 5 questions with us. I know that the viewers at home who sent those in will be happy to have had their questions answered, but also to learn a little bit more about your research. And so thanks for the time, and I hope you get to go have a walk right now.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone for watching.